What is up, everybody? Welcome here to the TDR Show. Jay is here. We're excited to have Jay. Anytime we can have Jay on the pod that he does with me, it's always great. We're talking today TDR Devy Rankings. So we're diving into 2025 now. Now, we do Devy here on the channel. So if you just do Dynasty, you can stick around though, because we are talking about Dynasty guys, 2026 guys that are coming up next. But we want to kind of start here. So the next 3 weeks, we're going heavy Devy. That rhymes. You like that? So for quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, and then we'll be doing a mock draft. We're going to finish off this month as a mock draft episode of a Devy mock as we kind of get into it. So, and it's going to be a deep one. I haven't told Jay yet, but it's going to be 10 rounds. So we're going deep on that Devy mock to give it to the people. But today we're starting with quarterbacks. So we're going to be talking about quarterbacks. We're going to go through our top 12 rankings. We got some player profiles of guys that we really like, that we think, hey, you should get a kind of a, just a watchful eye on. And then also incoming freshmen. We're going to talk about our top 3. We do have our rankings here at TDR on our rankings page, and the freshmen are coming in now. I've been inputting them and going through it. I'll have my freshman rankings in there this week. So if you're interested in that, dive in. But we are going to be talking about our top 3 right now at the position. It's a fun quarterback class. So this is the Devy Rankings 2025 edition. We're going to talk about all quarterbacks, and I can't wait to argue about them with my boy Jay. All right. Now, just before we get into the quarterbacks, the meat, before we get in there, I do want to talk about strategy, because it's important to talk strategy here. And this is generally my strategy when I go through it. And then I'll let Jay kind of go over, what does he not believe? Does he believe in this stuff as he goes? But with quarterbacks, if you followed me, all the guys in the Patreon and Discord are going to laugh when they hear me say this, because I've been saying it forever. Don't draft Devy quarterbacks. So even though we're doing Devy rankings right now, one thing I will say is, I am very against drafting quarterbacks highly that I don't think are going to be first top 5 picks. Now, there's 2 in this one. There's 2 guys that I really, really like. And there's 2 guys that I'd be like, okay, I get it. I understand drafting these guys based on their perceived value, but we've seen so many quarterbacks just bite us in the ass. DJU, who's still biting people in the ass. Just ask Florida State fans. You're looking at Spencer Rattlers, the Cade Klubniks, the Connor Wiegman, Jackson Arnold. Go through it. Some of those guys are highly sought after guys. If you want to go back to Keaton Slovis, remember Keaton Slovis truthers out there. Drafting quarterbacks at a high clip can really hurt you in the long run in Devy. So even though I'm advocating, I'm really just advocating be careful. Be careful when you're winning quarterbacks there. Don't overdraft some of these guys based on their perceived value. We're going to get into that. That's our job. So really don't overdraft or overvalue. And I think overvalue is key. One reason I say that is I think that veteran QB2s in Dynasty on your Dynasty team are way much easier to acquire now. Think of the Baker Mayfields out there that you've been able to get, the Jared Goffs, those QB2s that you're pretty comfortable with. So you could still draft those guys or either trade for them now, and it's easier. So you're not looking at your Devy roster and your Dynasty roster saying, oh, I got to get a quarterback, right? Really, it's accumulating value in that area there. For me, I'm also prioritizing upside at the position. What the hell does upside mean? To me, it's a Konami code. They can run the football, playing a great offense, a top 5 offense with a play call or play coach that can teach them the way. And then they just have that it's that zen about them, right? That it factor. Hey, the Arch Manning factor, right? They have that kind of built into them. Wait until later rounds if you can. And we're going to talk about some later rounds guys. We've been doing Devy drafts, mock drafts there, and I'll kind of give you an idea there, because they have a possibility of bouncing back. So when Arch Manning was first coming into the league, or Devy League in college football, remember that first year he was coming in? He was getting drafted in the first round. He was getting top 5 capital. Then the next year he's going the 3rd or 4th round. Give me the 3rd and 4th round Arch Manning, right? Instead of the top 5. So knowing when to draft, how to draft, I think that's important too. And look at them as trade assets always. To me, I'm never expecting a Devy quarterback to end up on my Dynasty roster. I'm always looking, hey, if I can ship off an Arch Manning, if I can ship off a DJ Lagway, some of the guys we're going to talk about, for legitimate talent on the Dynasty side, I'm going to do that. So that's how I approach the Devy quarterbacks. I'm very, very cautious. I am a wimp when it comes to Devy quarterbacks, because you just get burned way too fast. Where are you at, Jay, with the Devy quarterback position?
I agree with all those points. I think prioritizing upside is very important. All those things you mentioned there, but making sure you're in a pretty good system with enough talent around you that you can actually make a difference and perform out there is really great. And look at here, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for that the first round upside. So I want in my process, I'm looking for quarterbacks that I think are going to go in the first round. And it's hard to evaluate that because quarterback is not typically a situation, a position where you come in from high school and play right away. Where running back and wide receiver, you might get that opportunity. Most times in most teams, you're kind of sitting a little bit. So you come in, you sit for a couple years, and then the hope is that you learn the playbook and you get in on the field and you start performing really quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to really identify those things using stats, and that's really what I like to do. So some of these players actually do get a chance to start earlier, their sophomore season, some of them even their freshman season. But really what I'm looking for is those players that I think can go in the first round, have the size to compete in the NFL, and start showing flashes, start showing those nuggets on the data side. So I'm looking at QBR, adjusted yards per attempt, EPA per play. Are they meeting certain thresholds throughout their early starts of their careers? And do I think they're going to go in the first round? So that's really kind of how I play it. I do think that it's important that you don't overvalue the quarterbacks and you try and look for values. A lot of times you're going to find some guys, some diamonds in the rough in that fourth or fifth or sixth round that you don't have to take, have to reach and take that QB in the back end of the first after 7 QBs have already gone or 6 QBs have already gone. So just some thoughts there on the QB.
I think one thing that will happen is you sit in a draft, and we all draft these things, especially if you're new to the format. You're like, oh, I got to get my quarterback. I got to get that quarterback. I got to do it. Because you're used to dynasty drafts where if you're outside the top 8, 9, it gets a little rough out there, right? And you're sitting there like, oh, can I really, if Caleb Williams is my QB1 heading into the next year, am I comfortable, right? That's a question you have to ask yourself in dynasty drafts. In Dev, you don't have to do that, right? If you miss out on some of those guys, you just, I can't advocate more. And I know a lot of people do use our rankings for this. They do tiered rankings in Devy. So they just kind of say, hey, this is my tier of it. We have an overall ranking sheet, and they just take it and they say, hey, next guy up, right? Next guy up, rather than, oh, I got to get that quarterback. No, you don't. Because that's how it burns you, and it burns a hole in your roster there. But let's get into our rankings. This is the meat. This is what people want here. So we're going to go backwards up, right? So we're going to start with 12 and work our way up to 6 right here, and then go top 5 for us. We're going to kind of work through just some of it, right? So when we're looking at rankings, and when I'm looking at rankings, number one thing I'm looking for is, can they be an NFL player? I don't care about how many stats they put up, how much production they have. That's for my spreadsheet man over here to talk about and say how wrong I am if they aren't producing there. And then I like a little spice in my rankings. So I do like picking on a couple guys that I'm like, hey, they might not have the size, they might not have that production, but they got something on tape that I really like. So for me, that's kind of what I look at. I know Jay's got a whole analytical process. He's talked about it a lot in terms of his rankings. So let's go through the first 3, or the bottom 3, excuse me. So at 12, Jay has someone I don't have in my top 12. That's Cade Klubnik. I have Damon Williams Jr. from Washington. Cade Klubnik's from Clemson. He's been there for a while, be a 4th-year kid next year. Damon Williams was a true freshman last year, got some run towards the end of the season. At 11, he has Dante Moore, and I have Jackson Arnold. And then we just flipped it, and he had Jackson Arnold at 10. I had Dante Moore at 10. So that's kind of how those work there. Well, and we're just going to kind of talk about these guys. We're going to profile a couple of them that we really want to hit on and talk about here. But before we get into the next few here, Cade Klubnik's on your board. Why is Cade Klubnik on your board, and why am I an idiot for not having Cade Klubnik on my board?
Well, I think what most people are thinking about Cade Klubnik was his first 2 years, and really it's a matter of expectations. That first year he didn't play the whole year, but he had some slice, and then the next year people were expecting him to be the guy at Clemson, and he just didn't have that great of a season. Well, last season he actually sneakily had a really good season, and it doesn't show up. I think people they had really high expectations, didn't quite meet it. And then, in year 3, it looked pretty good. So year 3, 3,642 pass yards, an adjusted completion percentage of 73.7%. That's a really good season. 36 TDs and only 6 INTs. His big time throw percentage was 5.4%, which is well above my threshold and a very good big time throw percentage. His turnover worthy play percentage was 2.3%. Again, met my thresholds pretty good. His pressure to sack ratio, pretty good. His time to throw ratio, pretty good. The average ratio is pretty good. And then his PFF pass grade this year, believe it or not, was 87.7, which is really, really high grade for a pass grade for a PFF pass grade. So this year was an excellent year, and he kind of has flown under the radar. Last year, his big time throw percentage was 2.3%. This year, the giant jump up to 5.4%. That was a huge market improvement. And one of the things I'd put that towards is this year he had Antonio Williams, which he had the first year as well, but Antonio Williams less injured. And then he had TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco, the two really, really phenomenal freshman wide receivers that were catching everything and they're doing really great. And guess what? He's got all three of those guys coming next year.
Yeah.
So I think if he has another season like last year, especially with the weapons around him, I think this might be, besides maybe Ohio State, maybe Auburn, I think this might be one of the best wide receiver pass catcher groups that you have in all of college football with Antonio Williams, TJ Moore, and Brian Wesco. They're all on the same team. And then you get a quarterback that's starting to light up a little bit. That big time throw percentage, those NFL level throws types start getting higher. That's kind of where I'm thinking about Cade Klubnik. I can see a situation where he's moving up, where the pressure's upward here. There's some unknowns here that we have above him, but I think there's pressure going upward for Klubnik coming into 2025.
Yeah, it's not a bad call. So before I get all the weird, there are some Cade Klubnik guys out there always yell at me about not including him. He's at 13 for me. All right, y'all. So he is right there, right? So I just want to double check right now. He is at 13. I think he made great points. I think his best game this year down the stretch was Texas. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. They really got close to upsetting Texas in that first round. Kind of, there was back and forth there for a little bit. I think the question for me is like sometimes like that South Carolina game this year, that 1 interception really wasn't great. No touchdowns. Like I think for me with Cade, it's the inconsistency. Like, before it was the size because he had to put on some weight when he got to Clemson. Obviously that first year, like you mentioned, it was kind of weird with the whole DJU situation or whatever. Obviously 2023 only had 2,800 yards and 9 interceptions. Didn't look great. This year he definitely got that production. So now what I'm looking for with Cade, and he could definitely do it, right? When we're talking a 26 class of quarterbacks, he could definitely play his way into it if he has that consistency for another year, right? And he does that. I think in the games that he played against very good opponents, Georgia, interceptions, 142 yards. Not great. 65 passing rate, PFF passing grade. Then you go down the list. You're kind of looking at some of the good teams in the ACC. He's okay, but against, Louisville, not a great showing there. But they did what they needed to do. The South Carolina game. SMU game, he looked great, though, right? They won the conference championship behind his arm. 4 touchdowns, was very efficient. So there are moments where I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get it with Cade. I understand kind of what you're looking at there. Now, as far as those next two guys, giant ass question marks. Okay. So Jackson Arnold is someone that we've liked here on the channel. And I'll be the first to admit, like, I've liked him. He transfers to Auburn. Now he's going to get Eric Singleton, has Cam Coleman, who's absolutely just phenomenal. Malcolm Simmons, Perry Thompson. He has a chance to get back up there now, but he's a very dangerous asset because if he doesn't look good there, it's done. It's over. And so to me, he to me is a wait and see hold type prospect if you have him. If you don't have him, I'm not drafting him because of that really big risk, right? I think he's set up nicely. He has a great offense. Offensive line looks a little bit better. He definitely could step up, but he's got to step up as a passer. I think from a rushing standpoint, we've seen that. And on the other end, Dante Moore, sat behind Dylan Gabriel, did okay at UCLA, wasn't the greatest his true freshman year. Looks like he's going to be the guy, but Oregon could make some moves. I'm not sure what's going on at Oregon. He'll have an opportunity to start, but this is it for him too, right? If we come to a case where he doesn't win this job again, now we're really nervous based on that's a Jaden Rashada. That's really what that is. It's a Jaden Rashada situation with him at Arizona State and beat out by Sam Leavitt. Him can't even start at Georgia. That's what we're looking at with Dante Moore. And that's why it's very concerning because some people had Dante Moore and Jackson Arnold as their QB1s at some point during their coming into their freshman year. So that's why I kind of warn people about those quarterbacks there. Anything on those two guys?
Incredible uncertainty. It's very risky bet. They're maybe potentially high upside, somewhat good situations here with lots of patch catchers. winning type-ish programs, especially at Oregon. It could be huge upside, but there's so much risk. Just don't overdraft the players. These are not the guys to reach on. These are guys to get the value on if that comes around to you.
And that's why we have to have him here, because we know that if they do hit, they're going to go up, right? So you still have them in your top 12. Just we want to mention it's risky. Like, it's a risky bet there. All right, let's go through our 9 through 6. So at 9 for Jay, he's got Dylan Raiola, Patrick Mahomes. He thinks he's Patrick Mahomes 2.0. I have Garrett Nussmeier sitting there at 9. We both have Julian Sayin, Ohio State quarterback, at 8. 7, he has Garrett Nussmeier. I have Dylan Raiola there. So we kind of flipped those two guys there. He has Nico, Tennessee quarterback, at 6. I have Sam Levitt at 6. So we are a little different on a couple of these guys when you look at it going through. We're gonna profile Julian Sayin here in a minute. So we want to save him, and so we kind of really dive deep into him. But I think the biggest guy, the one that in this whole group, is Garrett Nussmeier, because, Garrett Nussmeier went from QB1 last year against USC, and then he kind of fairly, went down. Then he had a great few games, throughout the season that people were like, man, Garrett Nussmeier could still be QB1. I mean, people were still talking about him, even though he finished kind of, not great down the stretch in a couple of those games. Like, Vanderbilt, Florida-ish, Alabama, the 2 interception game wasn't great. Texas A&M, 3 interceptions. They should have won that game. Wasn't great there. But then he bounced back a little bit. Oklahoma, Baylor had 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, and people were like, oh, there he is. Like, there's that guy. And I think one other thing to note is not having Bryce Underwood to look over your shoulder, because he decided to go from LSU to Michigan. That'll help him. And I think he has a chance to play his way into the top 3 of the 26 class for the NFL side. I think the reason why I have him a little lower is, man, those interceptions were bad. 12 interceptions, turnover-worthy plays, 18 turnover-worthy plays last year. He's got to fix that. If he doesn't fix that, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I have my process kind of pushes more towards the younger guys, the early declare guys. Mm-hmm. And Nussmeier is my oldest QB here. He'll be going into his 5th year. So I don't usually put guys like this up. The reason why I have him up there is because I just think that the NFL evaluators and the perception is that this guy is probably going to be a 1st-round pick. So, in the situation with LSU, some really great pass catchers around him. He had a decent enough season that people, Brugler, all these guys were talking about him potentially being a 1st-round pick this year. Going back to school, gets Berrien bound, gets some other transfers at LSU, and now he goes on and hopefully has another decent season or even better season, and then gets that 1st-round draft capital. That's the only reason why I have him a little higher. Yeah. In my process, though, numbers-wise, it's kind of bleak. It's not that great. I just hope he has one of those sort of like Cam Ward type seasons where he just kind of goes off. And that's what you're kind of hoping for out of him next year.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, hey, I got to shout out. Anytime we talk about LSU, I got to talk about my boy Aaron Anderson, the most underrated wide receiver out there right now. Aaron Anderson from LSU got to be drafted. He got Nick Anderson to transfer as well. Trey'Dez Green, the tight end out there, pretty much the only tight end you really need to know right now. I don't know. The tight ends are a mess. We're not even going to talk about tight ends. But yeah, that's kind of how these go. So that's our top, basically from 12 to 6. Now, we want to profile a couple guys. So we're going to go a little deeper on these guys. My first one is Damon Williams Jr. He's at Washington. And I know he's small. So all y'all are going to make fun of me because he's 5'11", 187. I get it. But you know what? Damn it. There's something about this kid that's just explosive, right? So when you're looking at, games played this year, he did play a lot of games, but he didn't really play in some. So he got spot up duty, but he played in 2 big games down the stretch. Now on the year, he was 82 for 105, which isn't bad. 944 yards, 8 touchdowns. He also had 2 rushing touchdowns. He is a runner, right? And you see that size and where he's at. He's fast. But those 2 games that he played, so I thought he looked really good against Oregon, who was undefeated when they played them, right down the stretch there. He had the 200 yards. They were close. Like, that game was interesting in terms of like the score at first. He had a touchdown in that game. He looked good. He had 2 big-time throws, no turnover-worthy plays against that Oregon defense, which you have to like. And then against Louisville in that bowl game, he really showed out. 4 touchdowns, 374 yards, 81.6 PFF passing grade. Big time throws was 4. Like, he's a dynamic playmaker, and he doesn't. it's hard to come up with comps without just saying Kyler Murray, but because they're just short or whatever. But I do like the way he plays, and I know he's more of a college asset. So if you play a kind of college fantasy stuff, I get that. Like that to me, completely understand. Like if you're going to lean that way, but I had to put him in my top 12 because I just think he's a playmaker. He's that spicy pick for me. That's just kind of a special athlete. And to me, if you're a special athlete, I'm in on you. Like I like that idea of you. Now, would I draft him? No, probably not, unless it was a super deep league, right? Like if it's a super deep league, like because I don't think you could justify drafting him in the first 5 rounds. Maybe if you have a couple extra picks in the 5th, I would do that if it's a startup draft. Because I don't know, but I do think that he's got upside. And if you're looking for upside, then I'd take the risk. Like I'd be, I'll swing it there, especially the 5th round Devy picks. Sometimes, especially how deep they are, or if it's even depleted, he wasn't drafted last year. I'd guarantee it. So you could grab him later too. So if you're looking at your pool and there's enough depth there, I might take the swing. When you look at it from like what he did in high school, which can be different, especially because he played in Arizona, and Arizona's high school ball is getting better, but it's still not perfect. Like if we think about Ty Thompson, the old Oregon quarterback, I mean, he broke all kinds of records in Arizona. So take that for what it means. But when he played there, he had a 10-2 record. He had over 3,000 yards his senior year, 34 touchdowns, and he also had 1,000 yards rushing and 20 touchdowns. The kid was electric. That's 54 combined touchdowns. So I think Washington can also unlock that, unleash it a little bit. But he's smaller, right? So that's the hard part with his Devy value. If he was 2 inches taller, we'd be talking about, I'd be putting him in the top 5. Like that's how special this kid is. But that height's going to knock him down a bit.
Yeah, there are not very many 5'11" quarterbacks that make it to the NFL at 187 pounds. That is just an outlier of outliers. So that puts pressure on him. Guy I'd probably not draft at number 12, but it's interesting. If you see a guy that has that electric ability, maybe he's the special guy. Maybe he's the guy that's different in that situation.
Russell Wilson was 5'11", and he won a Super Bowl. Okay, so but he wasn't 187 pounds. I'm pretty sure he was like 215, 220. But we're not getting into that here. This is just a vibe pick, baby. This is a kid that I'm really rooting for. Like I think he can be special, and that's the fun part about him. But he needs a slide because this kid gets absolutely demolished when he's out there. So like learn how to slide, developing a little bit, putting on some extra weight is going to be big for him. But I'm excited to see him develop. Like that's why I wanted to get him out there and throw him out there. But we're going to go to your guy, but he's kind of my guy too, because we both have the same opinion of this guy. We ranked him the same way, but I do think that he has an opportunity to be a very, very solid asset right now, and he's a value. And that's Julian Sayin, sophomore quarterback at Ohio State. I hate talking about Ohio State, but this year didn't play a lot. Spot up duties, 5 for 12 completions of attempts, 84 yards, a touchdown. I think he kept his red shirt because he only played 4 games, so they basically could redshirt him. So he's probably a redshirt freshman, but he's sophomore label in terms of where he could be drafted. But Jay's the Ohio State fan, so I'll let him talk about him. But he has an opportunity to start right away now this year after what they have, right?
Yeah. So I'll talk about that. But you got 6'1", 200, and that's what it says on PFF or whatever. I listened to some interviews from him as they were getting ready to play for the national championship in their practice week, and people were sort of kind of speculating about him being the starter next year after some of the transfers were out there. And he called himself 6'2", 205. And he said it's going to be a big priority this offseason to put on some more pounds.
Okay.
The other priority, he said, he wants to be that leader in the QB room. And so he's going to work really hard on leadership traits and leadership style. He described his play style as accurate and then being a quick processor and a quick decision maker, which you can see if you watch those 5 completions that he had this season. It's only 5 out of 12, and he was only in there after Devin Brown got in and did his mop-up duty, and then Julian Sayin came in. But he was the third QB in. Again, not much this season. I would add that there were no turnovers. He had 2 carries for 24 rush yards this season as well, in addition to the stats Kevin mentioned. When in these situations, then you kind of got to go back to what happened in high school, because we don't have access to what these guys are doing on the practice field other than what the coaches tell us, what the players tell us. And if you can see some of the stuff in the spring games. But so what he did in high school. So he's from Carlsbad, California. In his career, he had almost 8,000 yards passing, about 210 yards per game, 86 touchdowns, 605 yards rushing, and 9 touchdowns rushing. So coming out of high school, he was at on 3. They had him at the number 5 overall player last year, and he was the number 2 QB in the country, rated by a player we're going to talk about here in a little bit, up a little bit higher on the board. But just very, very high end QB coming out of high school with what I believe that high school stats, if they're exceptional, then do translate to then good performance in college. And then if that works out, good performance in the NFL. I do think that there is some connection there between. So what's the situation at Ohio State? You know, Ohio State just won the national championship. You got Ryan Day, but you have a bunch of coaches leaving, right? Yeah. So we just found out Chip Kelly's leaving to be the OC for the Raiders. You had an offensive line coach, the defensive coordinator leaving. So what exactly does it look like next year? Maybe Brian Hartline, who's been a phenomenal wide receivers coach and a sort of trailblazer on the recruiting trail. Maybe it's his turn to step up to be the full-time OC there, or we're not sure exactly how that plays out. But there has been consistency at the quarterback position over Ryan Day's tenure as OC and head coach. And you expect the Ohio State quarterbacks, especially given the situation, to perform really well. So after this season, you had Will Howard. He transferred in from Kansas State. He's going off to the NFL. Devin Brown, who was the backup all season before the playoffs, announced that he's transferring, so he's gone as well. And then you had fellow freshman Aaron Noland, who was a very high-regarded quarterback as well, that came in with Julian Sayin. After Aaron Noland was kind of the guy for Ohio State, and then Sayin had decided he wanted to go play for Nick Saban in Alabama, and the day after he got there, Nick Saban announced his retirement, so he had to find a place to go so he can start school because classes were starting. So he ended up choosing Ohio State really quickly. And so now Aaron Noland has also announced that he's transferred. So the QB room looks like Julian Sayin, Lincoln Kleinholtz, who I feel is more of like a depth piece at this point. And then you have a true freshman coming in who will make our top 3 true freshman list here when we talk about, but Tavian St. Clair, who I think is awesome. But I think Sayin having that year in the offense, in Ohio State's offense, having that year of experience, also being a very highly graded recruit, will have a good shot and probably sort of the upper hand to be that first crack at being that, competing for that, starting position at Ohio State. The other thing, which I think you can't gloss over, and we talked about this with Cade Klubnik, is that there is an embarrassment of riches around whoever the Ohio State quarterback ends up being. And I think it's Julian Sayin. But you got probably the best player in college football in true freshman Jeremiah Smith. You got Carnell Tate, Brandon Inniss. Those are phenomenal wide receivers. We have there's a new tight end there that just transferred, Max Clare, along with some really good tight end depth there in Julian Thurman and some others. You got good rushers of the football behind him, running the ball. You got James Peoples. You got a couple of really high-end freshman running backs coming in this year, Bo Jackson and Anthony Rogers. And you get a transfer from West Virginia in C.J. Donaldson, who's sort of that bigger running back. And just like last year with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, you got a really good run game to help you out as well. So I do think there's going to be some turnover at the O-line. You have Josh Simmons, Seth McLaughlin, Donovan Jackson, all played some parts within Ohio State runs. Some of those guys were injured for a big chunk of the season, but Donovan Jackson specifically played guard and then moved over to tackle. That it's going to be some turnover at the O-line. Then you have the O-line coach moving over to go to Arizona in the NFL. So there could be some early learning pains there on the offensive line, but again, an embarrassment of riches of talent around him to be to help him be as successful as he can be. I think you marry all those things together, and I think this guy's got a good shot at really vaulting up in value. I don't think that I think that he'll probably be the starter. That's my guess. I think I put the highest probability on him. And if he's the starter at Ohio State in that situation, I do think that there's so much upward pressure for him. Going up with Jeremiah Smith, the tandem themselves, I think he could break into that top 5. I think he could be one of those guys that people really covet and could get a lot of value in Devy circles. Him being young, him being in this offense, and the potential that he has.
I think he could be QB2 of the class if he hits on all those things. Like, I think he could be right behind DJ Lagway. Like, and I don't say that lightly, because there's some very solid guys in that class, Dylan Raiola, some of these other guys. But I think that he does have the best weapons. So when you look at quarterbacks, when we draft every quarterbacks, we talked about that with strategy. All right, does he have a great college program? Unfortunately, yes. We'll check that box for Ohio State. What does that offensive look like? That's the key, I think, question is, like, what's that with Kelly gone? Because Kelly was an amazing offensive coordinator for them. Hartline's done it kind of. Remember when Hartline kind of did it? Like, it was weird how that kind of happened. It didn't look great, though, at times. Like, they still are okay, but I think the question is there. But I honestly think when you're looking at just the weapons he around him, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis allows you to miss on some guys. Like, it allows you to kind of like have some little bit of mistakes as a quarterback. I mean, look at what they did this year. I mean, they're going to get, when we think of kind of like their quarter, they're going to get Will Howard drafted probably first 3 rounds? Like, probably
Potentially
round 2, 3, possibly, right? Maybe the Raiders are going to take him now at round 3 or something, like when we're thinking of Kelly being there. So it's there. I also have a very hot take about Bo Jackson. I think he's Gibbs. I think he's like Jimmy Gibbs. Like, he's my running back 1 right now in the freshman class. So that's a hot take for everybody out there. When I turned on the tape for him, he was phenomenal. And then I looked at where he was getting going, and I was like, God, I hate you so much. I don't know why you're going there. But with all of that around him, and CJ Donaldson is one of those guys that's special. James Peoples is special too. Like, those guys are a lot of fun to watch. Sayan's going to really get that. Like, Sayan's going to be the benefactor of that. That's why I think he could. I think he could be QB2 by the end of next year, like in the 27 class. I don't think that would shock anybody. And I think he's the best value. So when we're talking about drafts and where people are going, and we're looking at all the stuff we're doing there, I like taking a risk on him because I think that you insulate that risk with what's around them and the situation that they're in. And he was a top 3 quarterback in the class. Like, people loved him when he was going to Alabama. It's funny how it shifted when he went to Ohio State, but like, that rating was there, right? So that's a little different than what we've seen from previous kind of quarterbacks. Well, Will Howard. But when we think of Justin Fields, top 5 guy. When we think of CJ Stroud, top 5 guy. So those are the things that you saw, and saying can be right there too. All right, let's get into our top 5. So a little bit different on these guys. I'm going to run through the top 5. We'll talk about each guy, but then we'll get into 2 guys and really profile them. At 5, I want to hear what Jay's going to talk about here with Sam Levitt, because I had him at 6. So I wanted to wait till we got into it. Just Arizona State quarterback, looked pretty good. Had a little moxie when he told basically Quinn Ewers, your ass, I'm better than you, and then lost, but did play well. So I'm going to say that. I have Lenore Sellers sitting at 5. You have him at 4. That's a South Carolina quarterback. I have Nico at 4 still. And I'm gonna get all kinds of shade. All the Devy people out there that don't like us, oh man, I'm gonna see the tweets talking about Nico being at 4 in my rankings. But I still believe in the Tennessee quarterback. I think he can be good. Then we have basically the same 3. Drew Allers at 3 for us. DJ Lagway's at 2. Arch Manning's at 1. So before we get into those 3, and I like to say that Jay kind of chickened out. He had different top 3, but he chickened out about 2 hours ago. But we'll get into the top 3 first, but let's talk about 4 and 5. So start with Sam Levitt, and then we'll kind of bounce around a little bit.
Yeah, so Sam Levitt is the guy that you have at 6 and I have at 5, and I don't have Nico in this. And so, part of my process is data, and Sam Levitt was, I think, probably the biggest surprise for me this season. Somebody that I had high expectations for, but I didn't know whether it was going to pan out or not. But this year really, really panned out to the point where Sam led his team to the college football playoff this year. But just looking at data-wise, QBR, adjusted yards per attempt, EPA per play, and rush yards market share. In all of those categories, this is Levitt's 2nd year, so he's a young guy as well. In all of those categories, for a year 2 age-adjusted basis, he was above the thresholds that I'm looking for in every single one. So, his career QBR is 81.6, which is phenomenal. It beats actually almost everybody on this list. And then Arch Manning doesn't have a QBR because he didn't register enough games. But while he was playing those games, he was getting very high QBR marks. But Sam Levitt, I do believe that I think QBR is one of those stats that does transfer really well to whether you're going to be a good NFL player. And Sam Levitt has one of the higher QBRs out of all these guys for his career. And for year 2, above the line in QBR, above the line for adjusted yards per attempt, above the line for EPA per play, above the line for rush yards market share. It seems like he kind of has everything that I'd want. So really all I need to see is another great year in year 3. And he's kind of meeting all of the things that I need to see. The only thing I would want to know is he going to get first round draft capital? And that's yet to be determined. But I do think that his profile was a bit surprising to me. When I started doing this ranking process, I didn't think that I was going to be as high, but I got to kind of let some of these numbers talk for themselves. And I do think this was a phenomenal year for a lot of those metrics for Sam Levitt. And he deserves to be a bit higher than where you normally would see him, I think, in my process.
Yeah, that's fair. With Sam, I think one thing I want to look at, I mean, we could have flipped Nico and Sam if everybody wanted to. Like, you could just say, hey, that's fine. But I think with Sam too, I think pressure got to him a little bit this year. So when he got pressured in the pocket and when they really came after him, Texas, for example, there was times when it broke down a little bit. I think he's got to get stronger and just, he got hit a lot on that Arizona State team. So, okay, can he take those hits? Does he get a little bit stronger there? But he's still young, right? Like, I'm not crapping on him at all. I think he's a very phenomenal player. So, absolutely, I think that when you talk about all the metrics that he's hit, he's right there. I mean, he's going to compete for there. So, he's a redshirt freshman, so he can come out next year. So, he's going to be in that class where it's like, that's interesting because he's going to have the starts. He's going to have the games. He beat out Jaden Rashad and sent him packing to Georgia. And you saw it this year. He led him to the playoffs. So, he definitely has the ability. And we saw that. I think for me, it's the consistency. I think for me, it's, hey, under pressure, how does that work? The decision making there, and he has the athleticism. He's got that dual threat area, but can he really okay, instead of just taking off and running now, let's make those decisions to pass the football when you need to. When you get outside the pocket, let's make those throws down the field. Like, those are things I'm looking for there. And I'll probably, I'll be quick with Lenoris, and I don't know if you want to say anything. I think from a rushing standpoint, he's a Konami code type kid. Like, he has that. I think, to me, he has to develop into a much stronger passer. And if I was going to move anybody down, it might be him for Levitt, because Levitt is a much stronger passer than him right now. I think Sellers has one of the highest ceilings of all of these quarterbacks outside of Lagway, but the question mark is always going to be, will he develop into a passer? That is my number one question mark with him.
Yeah, I actually was watching some of these QBs, some of their highlights.
Wait, you watch football? No way. You watch football? I thought you just did the
I just want to remind myself of what Lenore Sellers did this season. And it was unbelievable, some of the plays that he was making. He's being draped by 3 guys, pass rush right in the face, and launching it, on the side perfectly. It was quite amazing. There's so many escapable plays where you just thought there's 3 guys around him and he would just break through and then go and scoot for another 20 yards down the field. It was absolutely amazing to watch him play college football. I don't know exactly how he develops and if he ends up being the NFL potential, or the NFL prospect that he could be. But he's one of those guys that has the tremendous amount of upside. And you mentioned it, the Konami code upside, what you want to see in fantasy. And so I think you kind of have to keep him up there. I do think it's a little bit risky, but I do think you have to keep him up there just because of how much potential upside there is from him being, that really differentiated fantasy producer in the NFL. Like you said, does he develop into that passer? I'm not sure, but he certainly has the tools. I was watching Lagway throw, and it's like a flick of the wrist. Sellers, I think, is kind of a little bit like that. It doesn't take much for him to sling it out there, but when you're talking about accuracy and all the things that Kevin looks for in terms of what makes a good passing quarterback, maybe there's some development there, and maybe he gets there and maybe he doesn't. But tremendous amount of upside from Sellers.
So let me defend Nico, and then we'll get into the top 3 guys. I can't quit Nico because I think that he has the tools. He's got a long way to go as a passer too, and I think that he saw moments, and everybody's going to point to the games that he did well against Vanderbilt, UTEP, Chattanooga. I get it. Like, those are not I mean, Vanderbilt was pretty good this year, but outside of that, like those are not the big games. And then the games that he struggled in, right? Georgia, 167 yards. He threw for 170 yards 4 times this year, including getting wiped out by Ohio State. I mean, Jay was there; he witnessed that. I mean, he was 14 for 31, 104 yards. It looked bad. ADOT was not great. I mean, when you see where he goes in that offense too. And I think the one thing with Tennessee is, that offense doesn't really predicate quarterback play. Josh Heupel, I believe is how you say it. That offense, you saw Hendon Hooker put up a bunch of stats, but again, didn't see the draft capital. I know he had the injury, but Nico, I think to me, he still has that factor of like, he can sling it. I think he needs to develop. He's got to get better. Make no mistake, he's got to get better there. I'm just putting traits here. To me, it's just about traits. And I think that he can have it. Remember, he's still a young kid. And my big concern coming out with Nico, if you go back a couple years ago, me and Christian actually did in like December, we did this giant pod about the incoming freshmen for quarterbacks. We scouted him a ton. I was lower on Nico. And I really did say, like, hey, my big question mark here is his development. He was like 200 pounds. Now he's up to 215-ish. He's 6'6". But, when we watched his game, I thought he needed to develop. I was like, hey, he's got a lot of development to do here. And I think he was my QB5 at the time. So he's actually improved for me, but I do think that it's going to take some time. Like, he had 19 touchdowns. He had the 2,600 yards. Wasn't amazing. 81.7 PFF passing grade. But there were moments in certain games that he played in that I said, you know what, this kid could do it. Like, I could see a quarterback here. I think they're going to reshape that offense a little bit. They lost some guys that I think they needed to, addition by subtraction a little bit. I think Dylan Sampson was amazing for them last year. I love him as a running back, but I think maybe not having him is actually going to help Nico. I think they're not going to lean on him so heavy. They're going to force Nico to develop and get better. But this offseason is huge for him. This is the biggest offseason of anybody that you roster there is Nico here. And I understand not wanting him in top 4. If you don't want him there, that's fine. But I'm still betting on talent and traits, which will get me in trouble. It always gets me in trouble with quarterbacks. That's why I started the front with it saying, like, hey, I just don't draft these guys. But I do think he has upside.
Yeah, definitely. He definitely has upside. But the point that I was trying to make with Sam Levitt is that if both of these guys in their second year, if you look at Sam Levitt and you compare that to Nico, Sam Levitt's above the line on all those metrics, and Nico's below the line on all those metrics. And for me, being sort of like the data focused type of guy, it's hard to do that. But the one pushback that I would say is that Nico has got that like sort of NFL appeal to him. Everybody's been sort of talking about him for 2 years, and everybody kind of assumes that he'll probably get into that first round, assuming he has a pretty decent year. So he's got that like, I guess, star ability or star piece of it that, kind of, if he does have that good season, kind of locks him, cements himself into that first round, where Sam Levitt, he needs to still outproduce everybody to get into that first round type of thing.
Yeah. And I think if Nico goes to, like, let's say, the combine or whatever he does, he's the type of kid that could have great workouts and someone will fall in love with this kid. Like, oh yeah, I can change him. I can fix him. Right. I can see that. All right, let's go to our top 3. We're going to go number 3, and then we'll go into our player profiles of Lagway and Arch. Drew Aller, we'll just be off the top. I mean, he could have came out this year, maybe been quarterback 1 above Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. He doesn't. He comes back to school. 6'5", 240-ish, depending on kind of where you're looking there. This year, bounced back, had his most productive year, over 3,300 yards, 24 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 79.1 PFF passing grade. Looked fine. And I think with we were actually talking about a pre-show, and it's a good discussion. Where's our tier, right? I think you could draw a line right across here. 1, 2, 3, you're comfortable drafting these 3 guys in Devy because you think they can be first-round picks. I tend to have it Arch, Lagway, tier, Aller tier, because I do think Aller could struggle maybe a little bit again. And there were some question marks, especially in that Notre Dame game. Like, that interception was really bad. They had a chance to win it. They lost it because of that interception. So, like, I think there's question marks there because there's some games where you're like, man, where does decision-making go? Where did that go? That's why I draw that line at Lagway at 2 based on value. But it wouldn't shock me to see Aller and Manning really fighting for that QB1 spot at the end of next year.
Yeah, I mean, the really tough part is Manning, if he has a really good season, is he going to come out? And if not, then I kind of feel like Drew Aller, given his first 3 years or the last 2 years playing, he's looked decent enough to probably come out and be like the hot hand to be the QB1 of this class coming out. But yeah, you're right. If Arch Manning comes out, I don't know how you you don't take Arch Manning over Drew Aller in that situation. But Drew Aller, we've talked about it all through the season. I was pretty early on really sticking with Drew Aller and liking him. I think he does meet in year 3. He met a lot of the metrics that I look for, and so I like him as a QB. I didn't agree with the bad stuff that people were saying about a lot of him, because I do think that he's good enough to be a starting quarterback in the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
The stats kind of prove it. And if he was coming out this year, he would have been my QB1. Maybe not the top end tier type of QB, but he would have been the QB1 over Cam Ward, over Shadir Sanders, over Jackson Dart, over all those guys, because I think what he's done in college has been a little bit better than what those guys have done on an age-adjusted basis.
Well, that's saying something then. If he's your QB1, then that's why you have that line right under Drew Aller, because when you look at it from this year. Yeah, 100%. All right, let's get to the top 2 guys. Let's start with Lagway. We have him at 2. Sophomore coming out of Florida, 6'3", 240. This last year played 12 games because Mertz got injured. Graham Mertz out there. Was 115 for 192. Did get injured, though, in the season, so he was a little banged up. But 1,900 yards passing, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. 50 attempts, 101 yards. So, like, production wouldn't just jump out at you. You're like, whoa, what's going on here? But I think this is all about value and upside, right?
Yeah, there were some production nuggets in there that I think are really, really important to talk about. But yeah, this is value and upside. This was the guy that we were just talking about that we referenced. I had him at QB1, then I chickened out because there's a lot of upside at Arch Manning too at 1 as well. But this is a total potential upside. The same reason we were looking at Sellers, but I do think that Lagway has the dual threat capability, but he is an incredible passer, especially from an down the field perspective. Early in last season, he was really, really very, very accurate on his deep balls. But just a little background here, and just to preface this, remember, I think that high school stats do mean a little bit to what you could be in college. So he's from Willis, Texas. For his career, he threw for 8,392 yards, or basically about 200 yards per game. He had 100 TDs, passing TDs in his high school career, 2,196 rush yards, 29 rush TDs. And just for perspective, his senior season, he threw for 4,600 yards, about 354 yards per game, 58 TDs in one season, 957 rush yards, 73 yards per game there, and 16 rush TDs in that game. So coming out of high school, he was on three's number 1 guy, right above Julian Sayin there. The number 2 overall player in the country, right behind Jeremiah Smith for that year. So this is an incredible profile. You ran through the stats. There's a couple of stats that we haven't talked about here. So big time throws, he had 18 big time throws, 7 turnover plays. The big time throw percentage that works out to be is about 8.8%. So just providing a little context there. So with a minimum of 125 dropbacks in all of Power 5 college football here, Lagway was first in big time throw percentage. So he was making the most what the PFF graders view as the most NFL level throws on a percentage basis than anybody else in the whole country in 2024, which is tremendous potential. Like this is exactly the type of upside that you want to try and hit on. And sort of a 3-ish% turnover worthy play percentage. I'd love to see it just slightly under. There was the last game against Tulane. There were two interceptions. If he didn't have those, it would have been even more perfect. But just like it's close enough that next year I think that he'll probably get that turnover percentage below that 3% mark, which is kind of a mark that I like to see. His completion percentage, adjusted completion percentage, was only a 68.1. I'd love to see that get into the low to mid 70s. Somewhere above that like 72% range. That's really what I wanted to see. There were some moments when he had a decent or a kind of high pressure to sack ratio, but if you look at it on the whole for the whole season, it was fine, and the time to throw was averaged around 2.95 seconds, and you'd love to see that work its way down further and further away from 3 seconds. But he also has the rushing upside as well. So he had 42 attempts, 188 yards on the season. I think there's even higher upside there, but you mentioned the injury. You mentioned some of the things that could happen. The situation is kind of okay. It's not like what you see at a Klubnik. It's not what you see at Julian Sayin. But you got Billy Napier there again. The pass catchers, we've been very high at times on Eugene Wilson. He's been injured at points, but I think Eugene Wilson has some NFL potential there. You got Tank Hawkins. You got a transfer from UCLA, formerly of UCLA, J. Michael Strudevant. And then you got some true freshmen that could be interesting as well. Vernal Brown and Dallas Wilson, and a great running back in Jaden Baugh as well to kind of pair with him. But what this is, nothing. Not the stats didn't really incredibly jump off the page. You have great high school production. A guy that's playing right away out of college, true freshman. Really, really high, like higher than all of college football, big time throw percentage. And the dual threat capability, I think this is the type of upside profile that you really want to bet on in college. I do think you should probably take him in the first round of your Devy drafts if you're thinking about it. This is one of those quarterbacks that I do think it's worth sort of the risk, even though there is risk. There's risk with all these quarterbacks. I do think that he's worth some of that risk in taking him fairly high. And so I like DJ Lagay. Chickened out a little bit. I was gonna say I want him at number 1, but I think that Lagway's got that really, really high upside potential.
Yeah, and I think with the upside, you can say you want him at 1. That's fine. I think the point I will bring up too, Vernal Brown is my wide receiver 2 right now of the freshman class, so I'm really pretty high on him. I like Dallas Wilson as well. Those two guys are legit. Like those two guys are like Auburn guys from last year, Cam Coleman, Perry, those guys. So if Lagway has that, and if Eugene Wilson can come back and be healthy, he wasn't healthy last year. Now we're talking about something. And I've always kind of liked J. Michael Studevant. Like he was a Texas track kid forever. Didn't really pan out at Cal and then at UCLA. But hey, who knows? With Lagway there, the ability is there. So I agree. I think he's a clear-cut top 2 Devy quarterback. I mean, it's pretty simple with his upside, his rushing ability. I think he can definitely take that next step with these wide receivers in that room, and you're excited about him. Now, next guy's Arch Manning Jr. Everybody knows who Arch is, probably. 6'4", 225 coming in. This last year, played in 10 games, 61 out of 90 for his completions to attempts, 900 yards passing, 9 touchdowns, 2 interception, and 4 rushing touchdowns. And you know what? I always make fun of the guys that say, like, these guys, Drake May is going to be running all over these people. And, like, we always talk about, like, Konami. I think Arch Manning's got a little bit more rushing upside than people think. Like, I think he's fast enough to kind of do that. He's got Trevor Lawrence type upside, I think, from a rushing standpoint, like an NFL standpoint, where if they used him a little bit more in the red zone, I do think that he could score more rushing touchdowns. I think that's something to note about his profile. Just to go, I know the numbers won't pop out automatically there, but that is something kind of to realize there. And I thought he looked good this year. In the 3 games that he had to play because of injury to Quinn Ewers, looked great against UTSA. 233 yards and 4 touchdowns. ULM, 258 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have 2 picks that game. And in Mississippi State, 325 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, all 3 of those teams were not good. Mississippi State might have been the worst Mississippi State program we've seen in a long time, but he came in and did what he needed to do, right? Didn't get there. I mean, there was a lot of talk about him starting over Quinn. Like, hey, why don't we get Quinn in there? I think Sark really just trusted Quinn and wanted to kind of, be the guy that didn't give up on Quinn Ewers down the stretch, and Arch didn't get there. But Arch has a chance to take that Texas team back to the SEC championship next year, back to the playoff. And if he looks anything as good as what we saw in those 3 games, even if he's a little bit worse, possibly, he's still going number 1 pick if he comes out, right? The only thing is, the caveat with Arch is his family has said he wants to get to 22 starts. Technically, he has 3 starts. So the question is, like, and he's played in 10 games, but that's because he had like a couple rushes for 5 yards. So how much is that going to come to play, right? And I think it just comes down to just how good he looks, right? But even if he played all 16 games, if they went all the way through the playoffs, he would still only be at 19 starts. So part of me really thinks Arch is coming back the next year, unless they win the national championship, unless he just goes off, they win a national championship there. So that's the one thing to think about with Arch, is that he probably is going to have 2 years, regardless of what happens, unless they completely go win the national championship. But he has it all, layers the ball well, throws the football in tight windows, has that arm talent that you like to see, gets the ball out quick, processes well, much better than he did when he came in. He had a lot to learn coming in as a freshman. When you go watch his high school tape, he was not playing against very, very solid opponents out there in high school at his private school that he went to. And then he comes there, the spring game, it was a mess. I remember his first spring game. People were like, whoa, what the hell is wrong with Arch Manning? Now it's different. He's learned, he's developed, he has that. He has the Manning name. That's all you need. I mean, he's got it all. Now he just got to go out there and perform on the field, and he's going to be a first-round pick.
I actually really agree with everything you just said there. And the things that I'd add are from a data perspective, those 3 games that he played the majority of, even though they weren't versus the best opponents, we're talking about UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, and Mississippi State. The data that he was putting up while he was doing that was better than everybody else here. Mm-hmm. So if that continues, if that type of stuff, if that type of play continues, it's going to be like one of those very, very high end Devy assets type of thing. Like we're talking maybe kind of getting up there, kind of where Jeremiah Smith might be, maybe not as close to him, but it'd be Jeremiah Smith tier. And then maybe Arch would be that guy that could get up there if he really does continue at that pace. So adjusted yards per attempt was 11.42, which was much higher than everybody else. EPA per play was 0.64, which was much higher than anybody else. I talked about QBR. It didn't register because he didn't get enough starts or dropbacks in this season. But when he was playing, his QBR on those single games were really, really high, probably higher than what Sam Levitt, which I talked about, had the highest QBR that registered out of these guys. So like the potential is absolutely tremendous. I think also because of the name, because of who he is, I think you get a little bit of, base level security with him. And if you're talking about QBs, none of them are safe. But if you got to draft one and you want one that's safe, this is probably the best, the safest floor of the group, just because the data's there. He's in a great program. Sark, Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore, the litany of other top-end freshmen and sophomore have. The backfield they have with CJ Baxter, Jarek Gisman, Wisner. It's a good setup, and I think he's set up to do really well this season. But like you said, he may or may not come out next year. I'm not sure what exactly that does to his Devy value. Maybe it just prolongs how long you have to hold them until you get to use them type of thing. But, the setup here is really good. I think he's a very safe level prospect. And even when we were doing our show, that run against UTSA where he went for almost 70 yards rushing the ball, we were surprised. I think we were very surprised. And we're like, man, he can really scoot. He can move for a Manning. And so, he even has that rushing capability as well. So I like him. I think he deserves to be QB1. I think Lagway maybe has that like very high upside potential where you can offer differentiated QB play in the NFL, differentiated fantasy QB play. So like maybe that like 20 plus point guy. But if you're talking about who you think is going to be a safe, long NFL starting quarterback, Arch Manning is probably the number one choice there.
He's insulated value, man. I mean, he's insulated value. That's just what he is. And I would say the top 4 picks right now in Devy in most spots, Jeremiah Smith, and into some combination of Ryan Williams, DJ Lagway, Arch Manning. That's pretty close to what I've been seeing out there. Yeah. So if that's the case, that's solid. I mean, that's really where you're at. And I would argue that I might lean Arch over Ryan Williams just based on insulated value. Like, and I know I said that about the quarterbacks. It's close. It's close. But we've seen freshman wide receivers pop off before, and then some of them don't do that again. Not saying that it's not Ryan Williams. I think Ryan Williams will. But speaking of Ryan Williams, so that's our top 12 guys, right? So that's our top 12 quarterbacks. As we kind of go through the process right now and going over our rankings, we hope it helps you. We also want to talk about freshman ranks real quick, and we're just going to throw 3 out there. Now, I've ranked 15, so I do have 15 ranked right now of the freshman quarterbacks, but we just wanted to say our top 3. And one thing I will say is of these 3, you could probably just replace the bottom 9, 10, 11 that we have, or 10, 11, 12 if you want to put them in there. I will tell you where these guys are getting drafted here in a second, but just so you're aware. So here we have it. Jay's rankings here. I'm just going to go through his first top three. Bryce Underwood, Michigan quarterback at 1. Alabama quarterback Keelan, I think it's Russell at 2. And Tavion St. Clair, Ohio State quarterback at 3. My rankings, I have Keelan Russell at 1. I have Tavion St. Clair at 2. And then Bryce Underwood at 3. There's some other guys I like outside the top 3. If you want to sub to our Patreon, that's where you'll find them. But these 3 for me, he asked me right at the top because I'm a Michigan fan. So Bryce Underwood not being at 1 is going to shock you a little bit. Part of it is I'm hedging my bet here with Bryce. I do think with Bryce, processing is going to be a big thing for him. He's got to develop that. From an arm talent perspective, Keelan Russell is freaking elite. He's an elite playmaker. He's fun to watch. He knows how to kind of not like, he knows not how to like take risks. Like he understands kind of where to throw the football every time. His high school tape is absolutely phenomenal. The one thing that's going to knock him, he's 6'3", 175. So he's small. But as we've learned with Nico, I like this, and Damon Williams, I'm okay drafting some of these small quarterbacks there. But when you watch his arm talent, man, he's got natural arm talent, athleticism, and has a chance to start this year. He could start as QB1 for Alabama this year as a true freshman. I know Austin Mack is there. I know Ty Simpson is there. I get it. Keelan Russell has a shot. Like he has a chance to do that. And him and Ryan Williams together is exciting. I think Tavion is solid. I think Bryce is very solid. And so it's not a knock on Bryce at all. I think Bryce is a very solid quarterback, and he might end up being that guy. He's going to be thrown to Andrew Marsh, a true freshman wide receiver out of Michigan, that I think should get a little bit more love than he is getting right now. And from like a Devy perspective, where are they getting drafted? Well, Bryce is getting drafted literally at QB6. So he's getting drafted in that basically, Julian Sayin, Sam Levitt-ish tier, Lenore Sellers, Nico in that range. In some, he's getting drafted like QB5. So he's the highest of them all. Tavion is not getting drafted. So Tavion's getting drafted like the 5th round by me in most of these Devy drafts that we're doing, or Devy mocks, just because I'm like, hey, in the 5th round, he's got to be there. And then Keelan Russell's kind of going the 3rd or 4th. But I like the idea of getting Keelan Russell in the 3rd or 4th rather than Bryce maybe in the late 1st, because just the value, the quarterbacks, like we talked about with Arch, where he was going his first year. That's not a knock on Underwood at all. I remember, Michigan fans, I'm a Michigan fan, okay? I just think Keelan Russell's arm talent is just special.
Yeah, and so a lot of times it comes down to like what's the opportunity these players are going to get. And I'm not incredible at doing the scouting of what these guys, what the film look like in high school. But to me, it seems like Bryce Underwood in somewhat a situation like Dylan Raiola last year when he went to Nebraska and he got to be a true freshman starting the whole season. I think Bryce Underwood as a true freshman probably has the most likelihood of being that wire-to-wire starter at Michigan. And just like Dylan Raiola, he didn't have the greatest season, but he had sort of that value held up because he was the guy that got to start right away. And he has some upside traits. And I think Bryce Underwood has those upside traits as well. Yeah. But, I do think that he's going to get that opportunity, that first opportunity to increase that value by getting out there and playing on the field. It's interesting. I do also think that Keelan Russell, it's kind of, I'm sort of pairing it with what happened last year, but how DJ Lagway, because of injury or whatever, was able to work his way in and kind of show off what he was as a player in college. I think Keelan Russell, maybe he's not the starter right off the bat, but it's going to be hard for those guys to hold him off if he is really as good as we think he can be. And he might be that guy that really increases tremendously in value once he gets on the field. But his opportunity to get on the field, I think, maybe would be a little bit less than how I'd see Bryce Underwood that first year. And Tavion St. Clair, I've already told you, I think it's Julian Sayin this year. I think that Tavion St. Clair is still a very, very good prospect. I just think that I think it's going to be Sayin this year. And it might be Sayin again the year after that. So then how does Tavion St. Clair's value hold up? Even if you think he's the best of these 3, it's hard to put him at 1, given that he's just sort of lower in the opportunity spectrum. Yeah. The other guys I considered here, I think like first out are like Houston Longstreet at USC and Deuce Knight at Auburn. Jackson Arnold moved over to Auburn as well. So should be interesting, those QB rooms. But, I think overall for this class, I really like these quarterbacks. And
Mhm.
some years you go through it and you're like, I'm not sure if I really like some of these guys. There might be one or two. This class, there's quite a few quarterbacks, especially these three that we're really excited about, and a few others that are really exciting that could be Devy relevant or NFL QB relevant in the future. There's a lot of promise in this class, I'd say, for the freshman quarterbacks.
Yeah, some other ones. Malik Washington at Maryland. He's getting a lot of buzz. I know Andy Pham, who writes for our Substack, which you can get also. He's a big fan of him. Akili Smith Jr. If you guys know who Akili Smith is, probably make you feel old right now. He's at Oregon now. He's a little higher on my board than most. And another Bryce Baker, going to be a North Carolina quarterback out there with Bill Belichick. There's some guys out there like, hey, for the freshmen that are there. But to your point, I think maybe I do need to move I think from a talent standpoint and from like, hey, I see the tape, they're all in the same tier for me. But I think with Bryce being able to start right away, I think I'll probably move him up ahead of Tavion St. Clair because with Sand being there, I think that's something to say there. And for those of you guys that haven't really dived into these guys, Keelan, I'm going to go through the stats and then we'll get out of here. But Keelan Russell, in 2024, he won the National Gatorade Player of the Year. He was 13-1 as a senior. He completed 238 of 343 of his passes, over 4,000 yards, 55 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. He also added 321 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. So that's the production he had there last year. Then with Bryce this year for a senior, he had 2,500 yards passing, 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and he had over 600 yards rushing too and 6 touchdowns. So he definitely had that. And then finally with St. Clair, he had 2,500 yards with 29 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and he ran for 254 yards and 9 touchdowns. But when you watch the tape, I'm going to tell you, Keelan just jumps out. Like he just jumps out off the tape. That's why he's my one right now.
Yeah, I mean, those are Lagway type numbers for his senior year. Those are awesome. And if he gets the chance to really show it, kind of like Lagway did last year, I mean, he definitely could be vault himself up to 1 for sure.
Yeah. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this. We had fun putting it together. Next week, like I said, Rankings Palooza here at the Devy Royale for Devy. We're talking running backs. So this will be fun. There's a lot of fun running backs in next year's class. Again, just like in the 25 class, some guys that went back, we kind of have a clear head on our shoulders now of what we can expect from these guys. Singleton coming back definitely added to that. Jeremiah Love is out there. My guy, Darius Taylor. Like there's a lot of guys in that class that are fun. So we're going to go through the top 12 though, all the way from some freshmen we'll talk about, who I mentioned today, and some sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And we'll be talking to you guys what you should be looking forward to next week, and then wide receivers the following week. So stay with us here. Hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, but you can't watch the full video, go below in the description. Find our podcast. We appreciate the numbers that we've been getting on there too. So appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys next time.